Hello, I am going to review this new David Cronenberg movie, The Shrouds. And just for context, I have not seen that much of David Cronenberg's work, and the stuff I have seen is earlier career Cronenberg, the classics like The Fly and Videodrome and Scanners. I haven't seen a lot of his new stuff. The main reason I haven't watched these movies is because body horror is really not my thing. It is like really creeps me out. It's really gross. Really the only genre and the only kind of horror that I can't stomach most of the time. And I think as like modern technology has advanced and visual effects and prosthetics and CGI has advanced, body horror has gotten almost like too realistic to me that it really grosses me out. I've just been scared to think about like what David Cronenberg could do with that technology. But oddly enough, The Shrouds is very un-body horror-y, although it is very much a movie about bodies, specifically like dead bodies, I guess. It follows this dude whose name is Crash. I think that's probably wrong. And he's played by Vincent Cassel, who is great in this movie. This dude has just lost his wife a couple years ago, and he has created this technology where you like put a shroud, like a basically a big blanket that like suffocates the person. You put it around the body of a person, and then when they're in the tomb, you can like basically it's like a live feed of their corpse slowly decaying, which is as creepy as it sounds. This concept, along with the fact that David Cronenberg is in his 80s, means that this movie is like tinged with this sense of morality and like impending doom and the fear of bodies decaying that is really fascinating. And the movie is spending a lot of time diving into those themes, as well as the idea of like technology preserving but also perverting the way that we view dead relatives and just dead people in general. There's been a lot of talk lately about how filmmakers, specifically like big name auteurs, are averse to the idea of making a modern day film because a lot of them view technology nowadays is very uncinematic. I specifically heard Paul Thomas Anderson and Robert Eggers talk about this, and Eggers is obviously very well known for his period piece horror movies. So as a result, I haven't seen a lot of big name directors really like leaning into the way that technology works nowadays. Even people that do choose to set their films in present day are very much like leaning away from the modern technology and the way that it like affects our communication, because watching people text or like watching people call each other is very uncinematic and just like not very interesting to watch. But on the contrary to other auteurs, David Cronenberg is very much leaning into that technology within this film, which makes sense because this movie, again, is very much about technology and the way that it affects our connection to people. Even the film's look leans into this. It is definitely not shot on film. It doesn't like have any grit or graininess to it. It's very like clean and flat and sterile looking. And a lot of this movie is just Vincent Cassel talking to people on his phone or FaceTiming people or talking to his AI or looking at a computer or looking at his iPad in a bathtub for some reason. And as a result, the movie relies very much on Vincent Cassel to deliver a great performance. And I think for the most part, he nails it, even if sometimes the dialogue kind of lets him down a little bit. I'll get into that later. But I think the movie does a good job of making these phone conversations feel pretty cinematic for the most part. The movie also just generally has like this very slow pace. There's a lot of holding on characters. There's not a lot of cutting. There's really like no camera movement at all. It's a very clinical vibe to both the visuals and the way that characters are speaking. Thematically, I find this movie to be very interesting. The things that it's diving into are very complex, and it's exploring them in a really compelling and fascinating way. I've never really thought about the way that technology affects our connection to lost loved ones, and this movie dives a lot into that. It also dives into this idea of like not being able to trust technology, which I think is a very like old person thing to make a movie about, but is something that is like genuinely a little scary when you think about it. So the ideas in this movie are interesting. But unfortunately, the narrative is really not that great and doesn't like have any momentum to it at all. Part of that is because of the very slow and meditative pace, but part of it is also because the dialogue is very weak. There's a lot of like establishing backstory through lazy exposition of people being like, remember when this happened, and then someone like telling them something that they clearly already know. I just found a lot of the conversation, specifically in the front half of this thing, to be very awkward. And the fact that the movie is more concerned with its thematic ideas and its narrative means that the last 30 minutes are very much a slog to get through, because it's not like building up towards anything. And even like the thing that feels like the climactic third act moment is really, really underwhelming. Not to be rude or anything, but the 2 hour runtime felt a lot longer. This was like the longest 2 hours I've had in a theater, because it never felt like it was building towards anything. It didn't have like a solid structure. So the last 15 minutes, I was just waiting for it to end. And then when it ends, I was like, that's it. That's what we're ending on. It's just like a very anticlimactic film because it has no real structure and it has no propulsive narrative momentum. So it ends up just coming off as really like weakly plotted and very strangely paced. I think that's intentional, again, because Cronenberg is just clearly wanting to talk about these ideas. And there is like a meta narrative here as well that I find quite fascinating. There's literally a moment where someone in this movie talks to Vincent Cassel's character and says like, you've made a career out of bodies, essentially. Which is very much what David Cronenberg has done. And it's interesting that he's making a movie that is not a body horror movie, but is about bodies. There is a couple like dream sequences where there's some like grotesque body stuff, but even then it's not like gratuitous and it isn't lingering on it in any sense. It's very much not trying to be a body horror movie. So because it doesn't have that narrative drive and it doesn't have like the tension and the grossness of body horror, there doesn't feel like there's a lot to cling on to here besides the ideas, which, like I said before, I am somewhat interested in, but I don't think you can really make a movie on ideas alone. You have to have like a story you want to tell, and I don't really think the story here works very well. The performances are fine. I particularly really like Guy Pearce in this movie. I wish he had a couple of more scenes. Generally, I thought this movie was okay. Definitely caught my attention for the first hour, but once I noticed that it wasn't really going anywhere, I started to lose interest. And by the last 20 or so minutes, I was really, really checked out. So there is something to cling on to here, but it's very much a mixed bag. I would give the Shrouds a 2.5 out of 5, and